Hello, everyone, and welcome to this episode of Pod Save Chocolate. My name is Clay Gordon. I'm your host, your moderator. I'm also the creator of TheChocolateLife.com. And today I have a special guest in the studio, Thomas Forbes, who's been a member of The Chocolate Life since I can remember. He's been a member. And we're going to be talking about cacao and chocolate in the Dominican Republic. And Thomas is joining us from the Dominican Republic this morning. But before I get there, what I want to mention is that this episode of Pod Save Chocolate, like every episode, is sponsored by members of The Chocolate Life. So you can go over to The Chocolate Life right now. This is the homepage. You can click on the green button if you're not a member and join. There are free memberships as well as paid memberships. So if you have the resources, you can support me. I don't do Patreon or anything like that. If you are also able, I forgot what it is that I'm going to say. I'm already so excited. My train of thought is really, really crazy. What I will say is that for every episode of Pod Save Chocolate, I do put together a post on The Chocolate Life, and there are a bunch of links and resources. So if you're not watching this live, or if you're listening to it as the audio podcast, you can follow along in this post, and you can get all of the resources that we're that we mentioned. So you don't have to worry about getting them during the course of the episode. And then finally, it is go into the comments, whether on YouTube, LinkedIn, or Facebook, live chat on YouTube. Let us know where in the world you're connecting from. And then if you have a question for Thomas or for me, then what you can do is you can put it into the chat, and I will get it asked and answered we'll get it asked anyway. We'll see if we can answer the question. And with that, I would just want to say hey to Thomas. Hey, how are you this morning, Thomas?
Great. Good afternoon.
Yeah, no, I suppose it's good morning where I am. It's early afternoon where you are. Where exactly in the Dominican Republic are you connecting from today?
I'm about 8 kilometers north of San Francisco de Macoris in a campo called Jaya, where my wife was born.
Gotcha. So we're going to talk about just the history of cocoa and chocolate in the Dominican Republic in general. We're going to talk about your connection and your history in cocoa and chocolate in the Dominican Republic. Then we're also going to talk about, what is the state of the current market? Where are cacao farmers and chocolate makers? What are they thinking about right now? Because 2024 was a really challenging year, and I don't know that 2025 is going to be any better. Right? So that's where I want to get. But what I want to begin with is just, if I can, let's give people a little orientation to where in the heck the Dominican Republic is. All right. Because I think that's something that, it's like, I think about, the Caribbean, and I think about Trinidad, and, it's all the way down at Venezuela. It's way south. It's just off the coast of Venezuela. And, I've been to Puerto Rico many times, and I didn't realize that I was basically flying right next to the Dominican Republic every single time that I've done that. So we have Miami, which is up here in the upper left-hand corner. Obviously, the island of Cuba, which is right here. The Bahamas, Turks and Caicos. The Bahamas, Turks and Caicos. Jamaica is down here. And here is the Dominican Republic, which is actually on the island of Hispaniola. Do you know anything or much about the history of the island of Hispaniola, Thomas?
Sure. I read as much as I can. It's also called Quisqueya. It's another Taino name for the island, actually.
So Taino is the name of a Native American or an indigenous tribe which inhabited actually not just the island, but larger parts of other Caribbean islands, if I recall correctly.
Cuba, Jamaica, Puerto Rico. Right. And the Tainos were about 80% of the native indigenous population on the island. There was also Arawaks, Siboneyes, and some other groups too.
Gotcha. And it's unusual in the sense that half of or part of the island was colonized by the French, and part of the island was colonized by the Spanish. So we have Haiti in the west of the island, and the República Dominicana on the right, on the eastern side of the island. Now, my understanding that one of the reasons why the Dominican Republic is so well known for cocoa is that it was the stopping off place. So if I had a ship that was trading along the coast of South America or Central America, it would go to the Dominican Republic and it would anchor and wait until the trade winds were favorable, right? And then head back to Spain. Is that your understanding? Or head back to the old world?
I've heard you mention that before. I've never heard that anywhere else but you, so I assume it's true.
Well, that is my understanding. And it's actually one of the reasons I've heard for the incredible diversity of cacao which exists on the island, because people,
No, I'll say that it's documented that cacao came to Dominican Republic in the 1560s or 70s. Originally, people say that the Tainos did not consume cacao. I've actually talked to a number of people that don't agree with that and think that there is a good chance that just haven't had any archaeological proof yet. But according to the records, it was in the late 1500s was the first time cacao was brought. And it didn't become commercialized until about somewhere in the 1600s, the mid 1600s. And then later on, the French from the Haitian side, before the Haitian independence, had brought cacao to the Dominican side of the island. It was primarily grown in Samaná, not the Mayor, in those days and early on.
We'll get to that.
Okay. And from what I understand, then it really didn't become until the 1800s is when you started to see significant production. I think if I'm about 8,000 or 5,000 tons a year in the early on, and then it gradually went up into the 20s and 30,000s as they went into the early 20th century.
Right. So I did have a conversation, and my mind just blanked, with the owner of 11 Cacao, which is in Jamaica.
Right.
And he says that there is evidence of trading cacao prior to Europeans' arrival on the island of Jamaica.
I've been sharing that Jamaica's found, and if it's on Jamaica, it had to have been here too.
It had to have been there, but that's different from how they consumed it, right? So those are, it was grown there, how it's consumed there, are two different things. Okay, but I just wanted to get
interesting. One last point: even if it didn't come to the Dominican Republic until the 1560s, there were still a lot of Tainos on the island. The Spanish were reporting back only like 10,000 Tainos were still alive at that time, but there was a woman named Lynn Guitar that did studies on the Tainos, and she feels that they underreported because they had to pay tax on every Taino that existed. So she claims there could have been 100,000 Tainos still in existence. So when cacao came, the Tainos started to use it anyway, probably.
It's one of those things that it would be really, really great to learn more about. And, and somewhere there exists probably some written documentation. We just haven't found it yet. Right. So it's really exciting. Listen, hey, I just want to give a quick shout out to Lynn Bishop from Panama. Says hello to you, Thomas. Enjoying following your journey on Instagram. Yeah. I didn't do that. So what I will do, Thomas, is I will link to your Instagram account on this post. So if people are interested in following along your adventures while you're there, they can do that as well. But Lynn, hey, just want to say thank you very much for joining us today and for the quick shout out from Panama. So we've got this regional understanding or where things go. And it's really interesting. So even though we have cacao, which is growing on Cuba, we have cacao, which is growing both in Haiti and the Dominican Republic and Puerto Rico and Jamaica, the smaller islands, not so much, which is interesting. Some of these might be Dutch, which would say, why aren't they growing it? Because it's really interesting sort of, this social microcosm of who was in charge of the islands, whether it was the French, whether it was the Spanish, whether it was the British. I mean, it's really quite interesting.
It is fascinating history to learn the relationship between the French and the Spanish on the island, and then the Haitian Revolution and how that it's an amazing history. Yeah.
Yeah. So what I want to do is I want to jump into this is a close up of sort of the north central part of the island. All right. And for if many people think about the Dominican Republic, what they might think of, they might think about the resorts along the north coast, Puerto Plata specifically. I think there's an international airport there, as I recall, in Puerto Plata. And so we think of the north coast as where there are a lot of beach resorts, right? But I understand from my experience, I've been on the island 3 times, is that there is cacao, which is grown in this region here, Nagua, right? But that in this part of the country, cacao is sort of, we see it from Nagua, between this road here towards Santiago de los Caballeros and to the north. And that's the concentration of cacao in this part of the island, right?
Yes.
Okay.
And then you take another line down from Nagua down toward where it says La Vega and Cotuí, and there's another band of cacao down there too.
Gotcha. So those town names. Oh, here's Cotuí. All right. Yeah. So one of the reasons why I've done these maps at different resolutions is, I want to get as many of the town names as I possibly can, because one of the things we're going to talk about next is trying to orient people as to where the cocoa grows. So here is a much larger map of like the center of the Dominican Republic. So we have Santo Domingo down here, right, which is the capital, and where I think that you'll find many of the chocolate companies and chocolate museums will have their retail locations, and they'll have their spaces actually in the capital, which is Santo Domingo. Right. But down here, what you may have heard of Boca Chica, right? The airport is in between. Santo Domingo, the airport is here. Boca Chica is here. Maybe you're aware of Punta Cana, which is way off to the right of the map. Maybe the resort of La Romana, which is down here. So just to orient people. But Thomas, one of the places which I know you're very, very familiar with, but which is also extremely important when it comes to cacao, is this little town up here, San Francisco de Macoris, which is on the corner of the map, right? And so, tell us a little bit about, your experience with the geography of the Dominican Republic, which we've got here.
Well, what's interesting is they built a train system from La Vega to Sanchez in the late 1800s. So
Sanchez is here,
and La Vega is over like on the main highway towards Santiago.
Okay, which is off the map up here.
It's right where Bonao, just north of Bonao.
Okay.
And so Bonao, Bonao has a patch of cacao there too. And if you look north of the capital, there's Yamasa, Monte Plata, and that's a mountainous area that has a lot of cacao. There's a gold mine called.
So here's Yamasa right here.
That's famous for cacao too. That's been there a long time. Cacao growing there a long time. But it's mountainous. It's beautiful. It's remote. I drove that road 10 years ago in a rented car up from the capital to Cotuí, which is the back ways to go. People couldn't believe I went that way. But
I got to say, so what we want to do is, this is a photo that you took,
right?
Where on your trip. I mean, it's when you say it is beautiful. I mean, it's a gorgeous country, right? I wouldn't say that Santo Domingo is a beautiful city outside Old Town. And I wouldn't say that, Boca Chica is a beautiful city, or, any of the cities that I've been to are beautiful cities. But when you get into the backcountry, it's just stunningly beautiful. But what I wanted to do is I wanted to point out.
That picture is of a cloud forest called Loma Quitaspoila. And it's a national park. And it's where Zozal is on the other side of that mountain, where they have their cacao collection and their reserve for the Zorzal Bricknell bird. Just north of San Francisco. And
right. So you mentioned La Vega. So there was a train just right here on the corner of the map of Sanchez. So there's a train to La Vega. Here's Cotuí. I mean, I'm looking at this. Yeah. So, but if we can come to here, you can see this little town of Castillo, which I understand is where you were when you took that photo.
That's what my original Peace Corps site was, Castillo. And
right.
it's
but then looking north, and on the other side of this mountain here is where you say Zorzal is.
right. Right.
Okay. So again, the point here is, I have a little bit of, so I've been on the island 3 times. I've been to San Francisco de Macoris on 1 occasion, right? So, and which is way up here. But most of my time has been spent around this area of the country, around Atomayor. But I want to jump really quickly
That's where
to
Eric Reed has his farms from Spaganvola in Atomayor.
Yeah, which is great. But so this right here is the Bay of Samana, which is right here.
Yeah.
And if you're not interested in cocoa, you probably know of the Bay of Samana for whale watching, right? Humpback whale watching, right? But for cocoa people, the single most important thing to know about this is this little town called here, which is called Sanchez. And this is where the name Sanchez comes from when we think about unfermented dried cocoa beans. This is where the name comes from. So it's not a special variety, which some people have said. There's no Sanchez variety of cocoa. It's just cacao and baba, cacao and wet mass, which is just spread out to dry. Is that correct? I mean, there's no attempt, as there is in Mexico, lavado, to wash off the pulp. In Sanchez, they're not washing off the pulp.
No.
Okay. Right. But so when we think about Sanchez, it comes from the name of Sanchez. Now you said that there was
it was on the bag of the cacao, Sanchez. So when it arrived in the United States or Europe, they said this is Sanchez because that was the name on the bag.
Which makes an enormous amount of sense. It's sort of like, when we think of Arriba, the name Arriba arrives from upriver. So go upriver from the port of Guayaquil up the Guayas River to Vinces. So Arriba is an indication of a direction as opposed to a straight place name, which is, I love the language and the history of language. But Hispaniola is the name of the island, and Hispaniola is the name given to fermented and dried cocoa.
Right. Yeah, it was in 1980. The president at the time was Antonio Guzman, and it was written into the law just to put that name on. It was a decreto. Anyway, so in 1980 that was created.
So there is a decree in 1980 to memorialize the name of Hispaniola, to refer to a specific processing regimen for cocoa. If you wanted to be Hispaniola, you needed to be fermented before it was dried.
And the book that I read on Oliveras from 1983 says that it got $80 over the market price at the time.
So we got a premium for this going back. So it's really important to know that this is not a formal denomination of origin. So, Denominación de Origen is going to be registered with WIPO, so the World Intellectual Property Organization. And so we have Chuao as an example of a WIPO denominación, as well as, I believe, Arriba was also formally identified as the denomination. So my experience, so I have never been to Sanchez, although I was organizing a trip to the Dominican Republic for Felklin customers back in 2014 or so. And which didn't happen, unfortunately, but we were going to make this trip. But I have been down here. So I have been to Sabana de la Mar, which is right here, a little small town, and actually stayed at this really interesting resort called Paraíso Caño Hondo, which is really quite interesting in Los Haitises National Park, where if you're interested in learning more about the Taíno Indians, there are caves with petroglyphs and lots of really interesting things that you can learn about the Taíno in this part of the Dominican Republic. You can take a ferry, I believe, from the town of Samaná to Sabana de la Mar. It's probably easier if you fly into Puerto Plata to get there from Samaná to this way, because I can tell you that the road down here from San Pedro de Macoris to Atomayor is okay, right? But the road from Atomayor north is a little bit challenging. It is a little bit challenging. I was driving a little Fiat Panda, and I thought there were potholes which would, swallow my vehicle. Right. But here, so this town here, Atomayor, which you can see is here, right, is sort of the center of cacao in the Oriente. Is that right, Thomas?
Yes.
The Atomayor. And a large percentage of the cocoa that is grown in the country is like grown like within the boundaries of this map. That's my understanding. No, that's all right. Happens all the time. There's this little town right at the top here called El Valle. And if you come into El Valle and you hang a hard left, right? Yeah, I have a cup of tea here in case that happens to me. But if you go to El Valle up the top and hang a hard left, that's where you'll go to the Hacienda Helvecia. So the Swiss farm, which was founded by Swiss expats. And if you go to Falkland and you purchase Hacienda Helvecia chocolate, that's where the cocoa beans come from, is this part of town. I was last there, I think in like 2016 or 2017. I was working with Solbeso and we were looking to source the juice for Solbeso production from the Hacienda Helvecia. So just a real quick. And down here in San Pedro de Macoris, there is a Zona Franca. So there's a lot of rum production, especially rum exporting in and out of the Zona Franca in San Pedro de Macoris. It's a deep water port as well. So anyway, so we've oriented everybody around the island, which is what I want to do. So Thomas, you know, you're an American. How did you get to the Dominican Republic in the first place?
Well, sorry for my throat. I went to the everybody, we're doing this live, and this is an example of doing it live. It is what it is. I just have some sinus issues, but I joined the Peace Corps in 1987, and I was sent down to be a water appropriate technology volunteer. And I ended up getting myself involved in a solar energy project. An American named Richard Hansen was training Peace Corps volunteers, among other things that he did in solar. And I was one group that me and a buddy of mine took off with it. And I helped two brothers start a small business installing solar panels. And they worked it for 15 years. And he even included me in his master's thesis. He dedicated it to me because he said he couldn't have afforded going to college, finishing his college, and get the solar business. But I'm still friends with him and his wife, and I go every time I'm down here. I go visit him, and he's from the campo that I near Castillo called Los Naranjos, and he the women out there formed an association amongst. There's probably about 8 or 10 of these women's associations around the country, and they've over the last 20 years have built a small factory. They make chocolate, and they were the first ones that really taught me how to make chocolate.
So you're talking about arriving in the late 1980s, and how long did you stay there during your first visit?
2 years.
Right, and then you came back to help. Then you came back to help start to work on the solar business.
Right, I came back in 1996 with City College to get some credits toward my teaching license for bilingual certification. So I spent the summer here taking a Dominican history and art class in the capital, which was fantastic. And then the next year, in 1997, I came back to work for 2 more years for SOLUZ Dominicana. The person that originally trained me during Peace Corps hired me to manage an ongoing project that they were doing, developing a solar utility company on the North Coast near Sosua. So we instead had 3,000 paying customers in the countryside, paying monthly fees, and we own the systems on the house.
So how did the connection so it was first the connection to cocoa, or was the connection to chocolate through the women's group?
It was more through the women's group. Basically, San Francisco is the heart of cacao country. So whenever we were installing solar panels, most of our clients were cacao farmers. And during the cosecha, when they harvest, they had lots of money. So they were buying solar systems. They were $500 for a 50-watt panel with 3 lights and a connection for your black and white TV is basically what it was, and a small car battery. I just stayed contact. And, you know, I remember in 1987, I looked at all these cacao trees around where I was living. And people said, oh, it's a cacao malo, you know, because of the reputation of Sanchez being unfermented. Gotcha. And this was in the 80s and hadn't really caught on yet. It was just starting the whole post-cosecha process of fermentation and drying properly.
So on the island?
On the
right.
island. Yeah.
So yes. All right. But at some point, your interest in solar connected to what turns out to be, then and maybe now, the largest independent cooperative on the island, which is called CONACADO.
Right. In 2000 and probably 11 or 12, Jaime Gomez, who works for CONACADO and married a Peace Corps volunteer that was actually in the same campo Castillo that I was later on.
Yeah.
She's from Green Bay, Wisconsin, Charlotte. And anyway, Jaime said, hey, we have a consultant down here on the USAID Equal Exchange CHO project named Patrick Burke, and he doesn't speak Spanish. And Jaime knew I was in the country. He said, hey, do you mind hanging around with Patrick and translating for him? So I spent that summer and the next summer, basically spent a month with Patrick going everywhere. I had a motorcycle, I bought a motorcycle down here, and Patrick would get on the back of my motorcycle and we'd drive around, and when he wasn't with Jaime in the CONACADO project. But I spent a lot of time with him in the plant, looking at how they make the liquor and the derivatives at the CONACADO factory. Yeah. Great experience.
People may or may not know how important CONACADO is in many aspects of the history of cocoa in the Dominican Republic. So one thing that people may not know is that the Dominican Republic, which might be 9th or 10th in terms of overall production globally, actually produces 60% of the world's organically certified cocoa.
Right.
Which is just like an insane number when you think about how small the island is and how many farmers. You said 40,000 cocoa farmers?
Well, I read in a different Silva Cacao there was 40,000 farms, 35,000 farmers. So I've read different statistics around there. Yeah.
Gosh. But on that order, and yet it's producing 60% of the world's organic cocoa. And my understanding of the history is that this was as a result of a deliberate decision by the Dominican government. They said, we want to differentiate what we're doing in the Dominican Republic compared with everyone else. There is this international interest in growing organic everything, organic cocoa. And so we're going to prioritize it, maybe some government funding, other sort of incentives to push people towards growing organic cocoa.
Well, I think the advantage was too, because at that time people started to buy cacao in baba, wet, and it was being processed at a central location instead of each individual farmer. So at that point, it could be monitored and improved to the level that was, high class, world class level cacao.
Right. And that, and that's another thing. So it's really important to understand that sometimes when the government gets involved in the cocoa economy of a country, it's in a very, very positive way. I mean, if you can provide the underlying economic and other kinds of incentive frameworks, you can do good things. But if what you do is you control the economy, like they have done in Ghana and they continue to do in Grenada, you have very, very different outcomes. So I don't, the first time I have no idea how old CONACADO is when it gets founded, but I first ran into the name.
I think it was 83 or 84 around there.
Okay. I first ran into the CONACADO name, right, when I first met Frederick Schilling, who was the founder of Dagoba in 2001. So he was producing organic chocolate bars, and one of the sources was, one of the origins that he named was CONACADO, one of the sources. I think he was purchasing through a pioneering organic distributor called Max Avelar, who's actually one of the founders of the fair trade or the fair trade movement. So just that connection there. Yeah, Thomas.
Well, just a point. It was interesting. I was rereading that Oliveras book that I discovered in the research center at Mata Larga, and I photocopied the whole book. And I sent a copy to Carla Martin a long time ago, and I was able to send you a copy, and I sent one to Gualberto this morning. But it's fascinating in there because it really talks about how there was some pioneers in the early 70s that really started to concern themselves with fermentation and proper drying. And after I read the book, I called Orlando Rodriguez, who used to run Mata Larga and is one of the cacao experts in the country. He's retired now. But he started telling me about there was 16 farmers in the country in the early 1970s that pioneered fermentation and proper drying. And he says I should do more research on these 16 guys. He threw a name out, Tobias. And my brother-in-law mentioned this guy, Tobias. He was one of the original people in CONACADO. But apparently there was 16 pioneering farmers that had a huge influence on this moving forward. And one of the interesting points, there was a guy named Dr. Hector Garcia Godoy. And Orlando told me
I know that name.
Yeah,
Godoy? I know that name, yeah.
Yeah, he was in the DR and was promoting. This is in 1975. And then they talked about when Hipólito Mejia, who later became president, was the Secretary of Agriculture in 1980 when they made the law for the fermented cacao, Hispaniola. It's just fascinating to see how all this is tying together. And yeah, it's good stuff.
Yeah, and you know, when I think about it, so the first modern single origin chocolate bars were released in 1983, 1984 for the 100th anniversary of Bona. And so if we think about, you know, the sort of foundation and the underpinnings of the modern craft chocolate movement, which many people would say, oh, you know, it's Scharfenberger in 97, right? There's actually this 20-year history where like building blocks of the foundation are being put in place in many, many parts of the world. And looking at those interconnections and looking at those threads is really quite interesting. So was any of the 16 names on your list names that we would recognize today generally?
I have to research that.
Okay, because
that's my next project.
You know, because when I think about Cacao, you know, this is one of the largest companies called Grupo Rizek. Their headquarters are in Santo Domingo, but their processing facility is in San Francisco de Macoris.
And their warehouses.
And their warehouses, but they own and manage farms. So they own some of their own farms and they manage farms for other people. So for example, if you've ever had the Hacienda Los Ancones from Michel Cluzel, if I recall correctly, Rizek is managing that farm for them, right? So Cluzel is not doing it. And I understand they also do farm management for from Valrhona, right?
And I know the Rizeks have a small finca where they've been able to isolate the genetics from Ecuador Nacional beans that came to the DR. And so now they've growing in a small farm, what they call Nacional Dominicana. And I know it was available to buy at the Cacao store in Brooklyn, which recently moved to Maplewood, New Jersey. Now it's not available. I think some German company's buying it all up from it.
It could be. But so a company like Grupo Rizek, which is a family-owned company, you know, I've visited Don Hector in this facility when I was last there.
Yeah, I used to stop by Don Hector in the San Francisco office every summer and sit down with him for 5 or 10 minutes, and he had a really good energy with me. He once told me, he goes, Tomas, you know what we have in common is we both love cacao, you know. And he actually sent me. I was with David Minkis. And he sent David and I out to the processing plant in La Guisa, which a lot of people don't get to go in and see. They process 16,000 tons of cacao there fermented.
Yeah. Right. And for people who don't know the name, David Menkes is letterpress chocolate in Los Angeles.
Yep.
So just all right. And I just heard that they're losing the lease on their retail spot, and so they're going to be moving.
He's moving, but it was very cryptic the way he posted it.
Yeah. So it looks like they're going to continue in business, but they're not going to have a dedicated retail location, which is what they have now.
Now, what's interesting, Hector Jose, I actually contacted Hector Jose, and he invited me to come in, and I got to sit down with him in his office for 20 minutes. And we had a really nice conversation. So the Rizek family has always had an open door policy with me, and I really appreciate that.
Right. And people may or may not know, but Rizek is also the owners of the Cacao brand.
And that's the Sendero de Cacao, where that was taken.
So El Sendero, right?
That's
so this is El Sendero, the path or the way or the journey adventure of cacao.
The journey.
Right? Right. Yeah. So this is actually a tourist destination. You can go to the old city in Santo Domingo, I think from the courthouse square, get on a bus, and they will take you to El Sendero, where they have a cacao farm and they have a small chocolate factory and they make bonbons, and you can have lunch and things like that, as I recall.
Right. The place started, it was Don Hector's weekend house. And
Okay.
in 1988, when I was in Peace Corps working with solar, all of a sudden I got summoned by Hector Jose. He figured out who I was, found out what I was doing, and he had me brought out to the Sendero before it was a Sendero, and he wanted to show me the solar system they had to put over the drying area for security reasons. And they were fermenting. They had fermentation boxes out there at the time too.
Mm-hmm.
So.
Right. And they've turned it into a destination. So if you're interested in cocoa and chocolate, you can take this day trip, and they'll do it in English and Spanish for you. I wanted to show this. This is something Thomas shared with me recently, which is it's at Chocolate.do, Dominican Republic. And it's the portal, right? The gateway into Dominican chocolate. But one of the things that I've noticed is there's just a lot of tourism opportunities in chocolate and cocoa. So destination tourism in cocoa and chocolate. So if you're visiting the Dominican Republic and what you want to do is you want to experience cocoa and chocolate, there are lots of different ways that you can do it, from a degustación, a mountain experience. We have a couple of different degustación, and there are a couple that aren't even on here. So El Sendero is here, but there's Hacienda Doña Maria, I think you said, was another experience. So there's a lot of stuff here to take a look at.
Yeah, the Dominican Republic recently expanded the cruise ship ports on the north coast near Puerto Plata. So they have tons of people coming in on these cruise ships. And I know there's a lot of activities going on up in the Altamira and Puerto Plata area for people coming off the cruise ships. And a lot of those chocolate places are near Punta Cana because they're relatively close to the tourist areas. Most of them.
Right, which is where the most famous and heaviest concentration of resorts is, in Punta Cana. Right. And I think there's also an international airport there, isn't there? So you can fly directly?
Yeah.
All right.
Yeah.
So you don't have to fly through Puerto.
You were saying the Puerto Plata airport. More people fly into Santiago now, even when they go to the North Coast.
I haven't been there. For almost a decade. So stuff happens. But, I think that one of the other things, so that you've got all these tourist offers, but you've got a list of chocolate companies. I mean, there's been a huge explosion in Peru. There's something like 500 craft chocolate makers in Peru, which is insane, right? But this list of chocolate makers is, really quite impressive. So I know Heritage Chocolate because it won in the recent Craft Chocolate Challenge. I mean, that's how I became aware of them. I've known Cacao since before it started, and I know of many of these companies, Mills and Chocolat, Inaru, Forteza, Del Oro, Definite. I mean, I know of Chocolate Norteña, never been there, but have you visited all these companies on your trip this time, Thomas?
I'm getting close. I haven't been to the Punta Cana. What you have here is Cacao May is in the capital, and then Cacao Tech is also in the capital. I've seen them online. I've never met them. I don't know who the CERA chocolate is, but Chocolate Chin Chin is, I think he's Bulgarian. He's out near Punta Cana, and he's doing a lot of business out there. And Choco Punto is also in the La Romana area. I think he's Italian. Then Chocolate and CIA, I'm not sure what that is. Chocolatera Norteño is a guy here in Macoris. He's also manufactures the machines that all the women's groups uses. And then he started his own chocolate company. Definite is in the capital. That's Jen, the German guy. Then we have Del Oros in Puerto Plata. I don't know what that one is. Forteza is the Cortez Hermanos premium brand. Heritage are these two French brothers whose father owned a candy factory in the country before. They're working in a real small apartment, almost the same size as my kitchen in my house. In Nauru, there's a couple Dominican sisters from New York that have made a really nice brand. I haven't tried their chocolate yet. Cacao is the Resex. Miltz is actually a descendant of one of the Jewish families that were invited to the country after World War II.
I remember visiting them when I was there.
Her and her daughter, they have great chocolate.
Oh, don't they have a shop like on the Central Square? Did they have a shop?
They just opened up a new shop, and it's a little bit outside of Sosua in the land that her grandparents owned. And then you have Chocolat, which is Diana Monet in the capital. She studied at in Providence, Rhode Island, at what's the culinary school?
Johnson and Wales?
Yeah.
At Johnson and Wales.
Yep. Yep.
Right. So I studied in Providence, Rhode Island, but at the Rhode Island School of Design, right up the hill from Johnson and Wales. There is a little bit of history here, so you can go and take a look at it. It's pretty good. There's a list of experts. So there's, it's a good, if you were interested in Dominican cocoa and Dominican chocolate, this is a really good gateway entry into what's going on. Just really, really quickly, you can understand it. But what I do want to, point out is that, Thomas, you had a chance to visit Oko Caribe.
I spent the morning with
Alberto. Right. And
I got a lot of new pictures. Alberto lets me take pictures everywhere I go. And he's the best host you can imagine. He picked me up in Macoris and he drove me back to my house so I could get here in time to do this podcast. I bought a number of his bars. It's amazing. He really has a nice setup.
Right. So, but when I think of small cocoa producers on the island, we have the big ones. So Resec is probably one of the better known names. We have the Roig family, which is another well-known name. But when we think about the smaller producers, Oko Caribe is going to be one of them, and then Zorzal is going to be the other sort of well-known, sort of independent grower supplier, right? And Oko Caribe is now making chocolate, but Zorzal is not, as I recall.
No. And they don't own land. Oko Caribe doesn't own the land. They ferment and dry. They buy everything wet.
So, which I think is, so for an island like the Dominican Republic, I think that's a great model, for farmers to be able to establish long-term relationships with somebody who's going to agree to buy the cocoa and transform it for them. So the farmers aren't taking the risk of fermentation and drying, right? And they know that their cocoa is going to be handled respectfully, not just thrown onto a drying pad, right? And allowed to dry in the sun, for that. I think it's a really, really good thing. I think it's good that companies like Oko Caribe exist. I mean, while the Rezecs own some land, most of their business is buying in wet cocoa. The Roigs, I don't think they own any farms at all, right? But they're buying in and processing just massive. It's like 15-20% of the annual harvest, right?
Orlando told me that the Roigs used to work for the Munez originally, and then they broke off.
I believe that's the case, right? But here we have Oko Caribe. You went and visited.
That's heritage. That's heritage. Using Oko Caribe beans.
And the bar that won in the craft chocolate challenge was a cashew nut bar. There's a cashew paste bar, so not one of these four. This is Jen outside of Definite.
Well, that's Wendy, actually.
I'm sorry.
That's his.
Okay. I'm sorry. Wendy.
Jen wasn't there. We were waiting for Jen when I took that picture. But later on, I had lunch with Wendy, Jen, and the two Heritage brothers, Jean-Pierre and Jean.
So are these in the capital, San Domingo, or are they up in San Francisco? Where are they all?
Oh, they're in Santo Domingo, and they're about 4 blocks apart from each other. And they're very good friends with each other. We had a nice lunch together. Yeah.
Right. And are they down by the old town?
No, they're in a place called near Piatini. It's down in
it's been a long time since I've been there.
The newer development of the capital. It's really nice. We have lots of towers and everything. It's kind of where all the money flowed out toward.
So west. It's more towards the west. It's more toward the west because I think of the old city is on the water and it's in the eastern part of the city. Okay.
It's called Parque Mirador de Sur, and it's a long park that a lot of people exercise, and all these nice high rises have been built, and it's where all the money is now in the capital.
So this is Cortez. So this is their visitor center.
Yeah, and it's set up for children. I happened to contact Eduardo by email, and he got me in there. I didn't get the tour of the plant that I was asking for, and I didn't get the interview with someone. But anyway, they set me up. I did a solo tour of this. It's a museum, basically, about the Cortez family making chocolate in the DR. It's fascinating. The only thing is they have a sort of a clown for the kids called Don Chocolatin. And Don Chocolatin did the tour for me, but he did it like he did it for kids. It was kind of weird, but It was nice.
Well, he recognized the childlike aspect of every single chocolate fan in the world. So there's nothing wrong there. So this is obviously it.
Miguel Hernandez. That's in
Quality
that's in San Francisco. Calidad en tus manos. Quality in your hands.
So your hands. I was wanted to make sure you had quality in your hands. Right. And you said that this guy is manufacturing a lot of the small equipment that the local, right? So what do you think of that equipment? Is it good? Or is it good for the Dominican Republic?
It's good for the Dominican Republic. I've only seen it an operation a couple times in one of the women's groups near Altamira and Chocal. I saw it in the group outside of Altomayor and Vincentillo. I don't think the nibs are as clean as they should be coming out of the winnower. They tend to over roast a lot of times. I don't know. There's no way to check the beans 3/4 of the way through the roast to pull beans out. They didn't put that in there. He uses a ball mill to conch is what he makes.
To refine. Right. But they're also conching in the ball mill.
There's a grinder, and he also makes the press for the women to make butter. And the press is actually pretty good.
So I'm always fascinated by small equipment, right, and relatively inexpensive equipment if it works well. So here we have an example of the packaging for mills, and then we're going to get and see the cacao bowl and El Sendero. We have, there are a bunch of other resources here. So let's go talk about this Dominican case study, which I think is really, really interesting. So by the way, you can go to the post, and if you want to download this case study, it is there. So if you are interested in a whole lot more specifics about the names of people and regions and the name of places and what production and all that kind of stuff, this Dominican Republic cacao supply case study was done during the pandemic, was organized by the IESC, which is the International Executive Service Corps, funded by the U.S. Department of Agriculture. Mariana de la Rosa, who's a friend of TheChocolateLife, who was involved in producing Chocoa, right, was head of the organization that actually did all of this research during, as well as there's a global study as well. There's a companion study, but this one focuses on the Dominican Republic. So it's here if you want to download it. It says that like more than 80% of cocoa producers are smallholder farmers. Just bang. There's some stuff that comes right off the top. And while there's a lot of time talking about the methodology and things like that, there's a lot of granular information that you can find in the table of contents, right? Which tells you a lot. And you can, find the names of the big cooperatives and all that kind of stuff if you are interested in purchasing Dominican cocoa directly, although many people are going to be going through a company like Resec or Roig or somebody like else for the exports. I know, Thomas, you kept referring to this as the Gaia report, and I kept thinking about this as, the USDA IES report. So I was like, what's that all about? So it took me a while to find it.
Plus you had Mariana on your program, and you interviewed her about the study.
Yeah, but when it was released, 3 years ago,
right?
So yes, no, there's an episode of the Chocolate Life Live, I believe, where we talk about that. I just wanted to let everybody know that, again, this is a great resource for working on it. There's the link to the Chocolate Dominicano portal, which we've showed you. There's a link to Zorzal Cacao, a link to Oco Caribe, a link to CONACADO, a link to Resec. For some reason, Roig doesn't have a website at the moment, so there's a link to their Instagram. And then there is on the FCIA Make Mine Fine, there is an overall page. So these are a bunch of resources about cocoa and chocolate in the Dominican Republic. By no means is it a complete resource for doing it. Thomas, I was thinking about taking the first half of the book you sent me and the second half of the book and combining them into one document, right? But then it ends up being pretty big, 20 megabytes or something like that. And so, and it's in Spanish, and so you need to speak Spanish if you want to go and listen to it. But this people who have never been to a producing country, you know, what they'll do is they'll see really, really pretty pictures of drying pads. And, you know, this is a really, really common reality, right? There's a lot of trash on the pad, and you've got lots of stuff going on. I mean, I was in a really, really well-known producer in Brazil, and their drying pad is not even as nice as this one is in many respects.
Well, they call it that drying pad there it's got a roof that has wheels, and they used to pull them over as it rained, and then, or I guess the first day of dry. This is all Sanchez. This is not fermented cacao, and now all the drying is done in tunnels. So people aren't using these anymore. Really, a lot of people have removed them.
You know, listen, if you have the resources to replace something like this with something more modern that is going to be more efficient and effective, that makes a whole lot of sense, right?
No, they don't replace it because the processors are tunnel drying it. They don't need this anymore.
Yeah,
in their backyard.
Right. But obviously, this is one that's still being used.
Right.
So,
yeah.
So anyway, so, you know, Thomas, what I want to do is I want to spend the last 10 minutes or so talking about, you know, your experiences with how, you know, cocoa farmers are experiencing, you know, how correspondents are dealing with, you know, the current, you know, change in prices. Right. So 18 months ago, it was 3,000 a ton, 3,000, a little bit more of that. People are paying the organic certification. People are paying the fair trade certification. Now the price is bouncing around between 10 and 12. What does that mean for, you know, the farmers on the island?
Well, the landowners are tickled pink. They've never seen this much money coming in. Right now, the farm gate price from what I've been getting from people is about $450 for a 100-pound bag, where it used to be between $100 and $133 farm gate. So the farmers are getting probably more than 400% what they were getting previously. The workers are happy; they're getting paid more. The guys that are taking the cacao off the trees and cleaning it up, bagging it, they're making more money than they did before because the owners feel obligated. Now they're making money. They're going to share some of that profit with their workers. The Haitian workers get 200 or 300 pesos a day less. A Dominican worker will get about 1,800 pesos a day. A Haitian gets about 1,500 pesos.
So what does 1,800 pesos translate to in US dollars?
30 US dollars.
Okay.
A day.
So compared with a laborer on a farm in West Africa, it's 20 to 30 times what they were getting a year ago, right?
Right.
know, so if we think about $1 a day, which is what, you know, people claim. So is $30 a day for a laborer a living income?
It's considered living here, yes. It used to be $20 a day before the increase in the price of cacao. So a typical worker got about 20 US a day for a day's work. Right. And now I found out, like one of my brother-in-law's workers can do twice the work that a normal human being can. So he gets paid double because he's of his capacity.
So they're being paid not an hourly rate, but by essentially a piece rate, how much they collect by weight.
There's two different ways of doing it. If you have if you're a full-time employee for someone, you basically get breakfast and lunch included in your daily pay. If you contract out somebody, they're on their own and they're just getting, but usually the farmer likes to be there, or the owner, or at least the owner's right-hand person, because they know where the cacao needs to be cut. They know where the finca goes from here to here, to this river, to this tree, to this valley. And so they're able to go out and manage and make sure that they're cutting cacao off the right trees, because they don't want them going to the neighbor's finca and pulling cacao off that. But I find that the landowners are incredibly happy. You know, when I sat with Jen and Jean-Pierre in the capital from Heritage Indefinite, it's hard on them. They're having to make some tough choices about, you know, what are they going to do, raise price or reduce the size of their bars from 50, 60 grams to 40 or 50 grams. It's interesting. People are in the women's group. They have to pay 35,000 pesos for a quintala cacao, a 100-pound cacao, where they were paying 6,000 to 8,000 pesos before. So they don't know if they don't know what to do, because if they make their bolas de cacao, they're charging 150 pesos for probably I don't know how many ounces those balls are now. And they don't want to raise it to $250 because they don't feel the clients will accept it. So the women's group is kind of in a tough struggle on whether they're going to continue to make chocolate and chocolate products. I talked to Eric Reed at Spag and Vola. We sent messages to each other, and Eric told me that he's sticking to his price because Eric owns his farms. So he's able to basically process the cacao that he owns, and so he doesn't have to deal with the increase in prices like everybody else as far as his retail part. Hector Jose and I talked to Patrick Burke on the phone, and they both told me that the certifications are basically non-existent right now. They're not getting differentials on fair trade, on organic. If it is happening, at least they told me right now the commodity price is the top. So they're not going over that. Now, Rocca sent out a note the other day saying that they're still paying over market prices, even though the price, because they said they're going to raise their prices 15%. So I sent a note to Nate and asked him, well, what do you mean? Everybody's paying the top commodity. You're paying beyond commodity prices right now? I didn't get a response yet. So
I think that something of what you just said there is really important to understand, right? Is that the premiums for organic and fair social certification, like fair trade certification, were put in place to recognize that the paperwork and certification costs, right, demanded, right, that additional payment. So that's where the premium comes from, $200, $250 a metric ton, sort of irrespective of where in the world it's grown, because a one price fits all makes an enormous amount of sense, right? But in many cases, in fair trade, what happened was it was designed as a supplement in case the price dropped below a certain point. So there was the fair trade floor. You needed to pay at least this much, and you always had to pay the premium, right? But that was at around $2,000 a ton, right? The last time I remember it. But now when the price is at $8,000, $9,000, $10,000, $12,000 a ton, the fair trade premium goes away. I mean, they're assuming farmers are doing well, so there's no need to pay for the premium. You do need to, somebody needs to pay for the certification process to make, to do the actual auditing and things like that. But there's no longer any financial incentive on the part of farmers to be fair trade certified. There's no longer any financial incentive to be organically certified, right? So I suppose one of the questions, and maybe good, are people still interested in doing the actual work to be organic and to be fair trade certified, right? Now that it's not an important aspect of, they're getting 10% more if they delivered on it, if that question makes sense.
Yeah, no, Gualberto pointed out to me that they're one of the few people.
So Gualberto is with who?
Oco Caribe.
Okay, gotcha.
He's originally from Bolivia, and he came through he studied in Germany and then came here working cacao through the German.
Like a GTZ?
Exactly.
Right? Okay. So if people want to know, if you think of Volker Lehmann at the Hacienda Tranquilidad, right, in Bolivia, he also got his background training at GTZ and was the reason why he went to Bolivia. So just another confluence of events.
I mentioned Volker to Gualberto this morning, and Gualberto acted like he didn't know who he was. And then I sent him the link, and Gualberto said, I worked in Alto Beni myself. Yeah. So I said, well, you got to know who Volker is. So I don't know, maybe they'll figure out who each other are.
Yeah. Yeah.
But as far as organic,
anyway, let's go back to the price differential and what it means.
Abel Fernandez told me, he says, Tom, it's hard to sell organic right now because I got a whole containers in the warehouse, and they got to be laboratory tested. And usually the process before I get final paperwork to export, it takes about 3 weeks. And so sometimes then the buyer changes their mind in the process, or it just doesn't happen. So he's saying the process of selling organic on a large scale is become difficult for CONACADO at the moment. They sell a lot of Sanchez, a lot of unfermented cacao. Probably half the cacao in this country is unfermented. The numbers were closer to 40%. I'm seeing people are less concerned about fermentation now with the price so high. Some people are just, let's just dry this and sell it as Sanchez. The difference is not that much. Might be $50 a 100 pounds for. And then I'm still trying to figure out how they work the way some of these cooperatives work, where they give you a set price when you give them the cacao, and then at November they figure out the value added for fermentation, and they distribute it to their members in different ways. I'm not 100% nailed down on that yet.
Well, so for example, let's say that, and this is, one of the ways that it's done is you say, okay, you bring me 100 pounds wet, and it's going to end up somewhere between 40 and 50 pounds dry.
Gualberto, your number's right. The 40%. Gualberto.
40%. Okay. So 100 pounds, 100 kilos wet is 40 kilos dry. And so what you do is you pay somebody the dry mass equivalent. Right. So you give me, I'm going to pay you the equivalent if you delivered 40 kilos dry, even if you deliver 100 kilos wet. So
today, 27,000 pesos today is what they get for wet Cacao.
For wet mass, which is an insane price.
My neighbor just brought bring 6 bags of cacao down this morning, and I went over and asked him. Gotcha. So 27,000 pesos is $450.
For 100 pounds? For 100 pounds.
And he gets the differential from Coparagro in November as far as the amount of,
for what they actually sell it for.
Exactly.
Right. And so that's actually a pretty common approach. So we're going to pay you what it is now. And if we sell it for more, we're going to give you a portion of the difference between what we bought it for and what we sold it for. I mean, Askinosie has a slightly different version of it, which is they're going to pay what the price is, right? So they were always paying minimum fair trade certified. Now they're paying market. But what they do is they do a 10% on the value add of what they sell as manufactured chocolate. So they take the amount of chocolate they make from the beans they buy from you, and then they give you 10% of what they sell the chocolate for, not 10% of because they don't sell beans. So it's a pretty common approach to do that. We're gonna give a profit share in terms of the value add, which I think is actually, farmers have very few opportunities to participate in upstream value addition. Right. And I think that giving the farmers, hey, speaking of which, hey, Volker, how are you? Connecting, I assume that you're probably, where are you in Santa Cruz de la Sierra? That's where you are? Anyway, it's good to hear from you today.
Hey, Clay, a little story. When I was in Peace Corps in 1988 in San Francisco de Macoris, Volker picked me up in his Land Rover Jeep and spent the day with me. And I was really contemplating leaving because I wasn't having a very good start in Peace Corps. And Volker and the fact that Peace Corps gave me a motorcycle were the 2 reasons why I stayed in Peace Corps.
Well, and here we are, what, 45 years later? No, 40 years later? I'm having this conversation.
37 years, Clay.
Whatever the number is. That's pretty crazy. Now, was Volker a wild man driving back then? Right? Because
yes.
Right. Because one of the fondest memories I have with Volker. So I gotta say, just from personal and building on your story, is that if you want to travel anywhere, and it doesn't matter if you're talking about the streets of Paris or the backwoods of the Itenes in Bolivia, that Volker's a guy you want to travel with. I mean, he's got a great energy and a great personality, and he's a lot of fun to be with, but he's also a madman driver. Right? So I have vivid memories of being in his bright yellow Nissan Xterra, driving north out of La Paz into the South Yungas, down like the road of death, which is called, coming out like 5 kilometers an hour faster than we should ever think of driving on that road with the Scorpions, right? Turned up to 11 on the CD in the car stereo. So much fun. It's like, it's great. And hey, Volker, while we're there, because I know Mark from Blue Spreezes, if you can, how are things going related to the fires in the Itenes? If you could do a really quick, like, are things okay? Are you looking for a bad harvest this year? Because I know that Mark is really, really interested in that particular question. Just we can do that before we get. So, Thomas, we're a few minutes over. Is there anything else you'd like to finish with in terms of, how you think? I mean, just number one, your love for Dominican cocoa and Dominican chocolate, and how you feel about the future of cocoa in Dominican Republic based on your experience on this trip.
Well, as soon as the price balances itself out, I'm asking everybody that
Where
I
do you
speak.
think that will be? Where do they think that will be?
Abel, Hector Jose, Gualberto, the Heritage, Indefinite. Everybody says between $5,000 and $7,000 a ton is where it needs to be.
And when would they want it to be?
Yes.
Okay.
They
Do
say
they
it'll
have
be
a-
balanced out for both the producers and the chocolate makers and everybody.
So do they think that'll happen in 2025, or do they think it will take longer?
Longer?
Okay.
Longer. Yeah. Okay. I see so much progress here. You know, I haven't been in the country for 10 years. I kind of, you know, I had tried to start my own small chocolate business called Chorena Chocolate. I have a dedicated kitchen to make chocolate in my home. I basically didn't make money doing it. I'm not very good at sales, but I made this body butter from cocoa butter, shea butter, coconut oil, avocado oil. And I sold a lot of that to people that own salones in Washington Heights and Upper Manhattan, Dominicans. So I did better with that, actually. And I'm kind of re-energized. This trip has brought me back. I see a lot going on in this country. There's a lot more for me to discover. I don't know if I'm going to go back into chocolate making or if I'm going to I talk to people probably selling some of their chocolate they make here.
So that was exactly a Mark at Blue Spruce question, your near-term plans.
I thought about making a YouTube channel showing the life of cacao farmers and the people that live in the countryside. There's so much to say. How much does a cacao farm cost? How do you manage a farm? How much do you pay your employees? What's the seasonal differences going on? The lifestyle. As you see, I found this guy made this cacao art where I got this guy in the comp. I bought that for 10,000 pesos, $167. It's got an owl with a rat on it. Mm-hmm. So a lot of neat stuff going on in this country.
Right. So Thomas, if I can, you know, and maybe this is, I've talked about this generally. I mean, I really like the idea that what you're doing is you're thinking about how do I go and like promote, you know, cacao farmers and cacao farming and things like that in the Dominican Republic. So I think that's a really and chocolate makers. But I think that one thing that might be interesting to do is, you know, think about, okay, you know, Eric says, well, I own the farms, and so I'm completely insulated from the price of cocoa, right, on the markets. I can pay myself whatever it is that I want to pay myself, right, in terms of that internal movement of money around. And so one of the things that I've talked to a lot of people is that, oh gosh, when we talk about cooperatives, we already talk about cooperatives in producing countries. We never talk about cooperatives in consuming countries, right? So finding a way to enable chocolate makers to have ownership in farms, right? So that to some extent they're insulated from the market price of cocoa, right? And working with people could be a really, really interesting, you know, as farms age out, as farmers age out, and they're looking for people to take over because the kids don't want, you get the idea, right? You know,
right. And I've heard this that, you know, when I was a member of the FCIA, I go to the conferences and there's always talking about the old farmers and the poor farmers. Mm-hmm. And I kind of, I don't know, I don't see poor cacao farmers. When I was in Peace Corps.
In the Dominican Republic.
In the Dominican Republic, the people that own the land are not poor, usually. It's the workers that get paid the minimum salary that are the ones that you need to be concerned with as far as poverty levels. The older farmers, I'm finding that the younger people are coming in and stepping up. I got a great story about a 28-year-old that's managing 900 tareas of land, 100 of it he owns. And there's a lot of absentee owners. Yeah, Clay.
Question. Tarea.
What is
Tarea? What is it? So what is the
Tarea? An acre.
Sorry?
I looked that up. Hectare, it's what I got it here.
A hectare is 2.5 acres.
Right, 2.5 exactly. And 1 hectare is 16 tareas.
Okay. So
generally,
and my understanding originally that the idea of a tarea is it's the amount of land one person can work in one day.
Pretty much. You get one person can harvest 1 bag of cacao per person, and a good worker can harvest up to 2 to 3 if you're the exceptional worker.
Right, per tarea.
per day. And
Per
each
day.
today
Per-
it produces about one. They get for both harvests, they get about a bag of 100 pounds per today, more or less.
Good. So, cool. Right. So, it's like, quintal can mean 100 pounds. It can mean 100 weight, which is about 110 pounds. It depends on where you are in the world. I think Dominican Republic is the only place where they use terrea, right? And so trying to move back and forth between pesos and terreas and quintals, right, and kilograms, and it's like, just trying to keep it all straight, right, is a real challenge to do. So just real quick, Mark says, hey, Thomas, most excellent idea. Do the blog with the videos. I think that would be great. We have somebody from Australia this morning. North Queensland Chocolate. Thank you, Clay. Always so interesting. Thank you for the work you're doing and doing well. Thank you very much. I appreciate everything that you have to say. I unfortunately have to admit that while I've been to Australia on a number of occasions, I have not made it to North Queensland. I'm hoping, hey, there's an Australian chocolate festival. Maybe what all the makers want to do is get together and have me come down and talk. So if you want to talk about something like that, I would be happy to do it. Hey, Thomas, same thing for, Dominican Republic. We can do something really, really fabulous together there to help grow, the resources that I have here on the Chocolate Life, certainly in terms of helping promotion, this and that and the other. Oh, by the way, just before I want to go, it's like people, yesterday was the 17th anniversary of the Chocolate Life. And I'm going to have this coming Tuesday episode is going to talk about it. The reason why we didn't talk about it today is because I scheduled this with Thomas before I thought about it. But yesterday is the 17th anniversary of the Chocolate Life. And when I moved the Chocolate Life onto the current platform, which is called Ghost, Thomas became one of the first monthly $5 a month contributors, and has been supporting the work that I've done since January of 2021, I think. January 2021, January 2022. I took a look at it up. And so I just want to thank Thomas. And I want to thank that is a perfect segue to remind everybody that you can go to the homepage of the Chocolate Life and you can become a member, because this episode of Pod Safe Chocolate, like every episode, is sponsored by the members of the Chocolate Life. I'm logged in. If you're not logged in, it will say join. And then there is a free tier as well as some paid tiers, because I don't do Patreon or anything like that. You can support the work we're doing. We got a couple of likes. You can subscribe to the YouTube channel. You can, all those sorts of things. You can follow me on Instagram. Thomas, I'm going to post your Instagram account on this page. Before we leave, a couple of quick things going on. I think that in response to Mark asking about, or my asking about what's going on in Bolivia, Volker says things never change. So if it's, which I will say, if it's not one thing, it's another thing, right? All that kind of stuff. And so, yeah, thank you, everybody. Thomas, anything in terms of a last minute thank you, or anything like, well, last minute thank you. I want to give you thank you, but last minute comment.
I always consider you one of my mentors in chocolate, probably. So I appreciate you having me. I appreciate what you do. I watch everything you do. We did that. What did we do? That audio thing during the pandemic. What was that called?
Clubhouse.
We did that every day for a long time. So
5 days a week for 140 some odd episodes, 29 weeks or something. I forget what it was. It was an insane. It kept me sane, right? Something having to be someplace at the same time every day, 5 days a week while we were in lockdown, like kept me sane.
You know how much I learned during that period of time, Clay?
I have no idea.
Amazing, because you had all the, you had the chef, you had the guy down doing weird fermentations, you had the guy doing the big line of manufacturing. We had Lynn from Panama, David from England. So we had a great crew. Yeah.
And so, I do this for a bunch of reasons, right? One of the reasons why I think it adds value to people who watch it, and I appreciate the people who are regular visitors. The other one is I want to know everything there is to know about everything, and which is impossible. But doing Pod Safe Chocolate and things like that gives me an excuse to talk to people, right? And I think any good day is a day in which I learn something new. And so these give me opportunities to think through problems and to talk about problems and have chats with people who have very different experiences from what I do. Because I'm going to learn something. And I'm hoping that everybody who watches this has learned something today. And so that's the last thing I have to say, except what I say every single time when I leave, which is, if you're working with chocolate and you're not having fun, you're doing it wrong. And you should be doing it with fun in the Dominican Republic. If you haven't been there, go. Right? You can talk to me, you can talk to Thomas, we can hook you up with people to go and visit and see and all that kind of stuff. And until the next time, everybody, ciao.